Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked and more of a question of when. Once the attacker has passed your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business, and there's one security solution that delivers it all: Netscout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Netscout. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Sorry, my clicker from my teleprompter's on the other side. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 off discount to attend the two-day conference. Use the discount code HH19SW when you register, or you can go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. I'll be doing the keynote, and Jeff Mann will be speaking. So, Charles Thompson is here with us. He's the Senior Director of Product Management at VIAVI Solutions. And Matt Alderman's here with us, and we're going to talk about threat hunting. It's interesting. We were just having a conversation with John Strand about testing, from within the network. And it's a conversation John and I had probably 10 years ago. And we're like, we really just need to implant something in the network and then see if they detect it, see if we can get out, right? Because we know people are going to get in. And when we look in the history of threat hunting, I wrote an article in I don't know if it was 2009 or something like that basically describes threat hunting without using the term threat hunting. And then if you fast forward to today, and we've got this wonderful term threat hunting, and we're excited, right? I like this approach a lot. It's something I've done in my career personally when I was at the university. Defending was hard, but I could certainly look for things that were already compromised. And so it has grown into, I think, a wonderful area in information security that everyone should have some level of threat hunting. And that's, I think, a good kind of entry point for the discussion. Charles, is maybe the different levels of threat hunting, because, you mentioned Capital One. I'm sure they had an internal threat hunting team, right? Which probably had nothing to do with the breach, right? But large organizations, financial organizations do it. Right down to small, medium businesses can do some level of threat hunting, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you see is a lot of security professionals take sort of a passive approach to security, right? They kind of configure their environment and they kind of lock the doors and bar the windows, and they say, we're pretty much set at this point. We're not going to really be active anymore. And so, threat hunting really comes in as a way to be testing the perimeter, but also the intranet environments to be able to understand what is actually vulnerable. The Capital One is a great case of that, right? The news is reporting this is a misconfigured firewall that allowed an employee to be able to access a data store that had all this information on it. Well, somebody thought they'd set that firewall up right, and somebody thought that their things were set. So even when you get into how often people are doing pen testing, it seems like it's incredibly rare. And even if you are doing pen testing, so often you're using active technologies, right? You're not really understanding what's connected and who's communicating. All your understanding is, well, can I get through A or through B? So it's a very interesting space where I think one size definitely doesn't fit all, but some level of active participation in threat hunting activities and those types of things is critical to a security strategy, and we just don't see anywhere near enough of it, in my opinion.
It's interesting. We traditionally have talked about detection, prevention, and reaction. Threat hunting kind of fits in between some of those layers. Now that you describe it, I really do think it, because detection is what are you detecting? You're detecting the vulnerability, the exposure, the misconfiguration, the malware itself, the artifacts from the malware, or just completely post-breach, you're detecting and doing incident response, right? Threat hunting kind of is right. You're right, Charles. It's that testing in between those different phases to see, can I detect it, right? if I put a threat in my environment, myself, can I detect it? Which speaks a little bit to breach simulation, but is an aspect of threat hunting, right? And then can I actually protect it? Are my protections working? And then if I can get by all of that stuff, does someone see it and how do they react to it? Or the other aspect of threat hunting is someone's bypassed everything, they're inside of our network, and I got to go find them before even more bad things happen, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest areas, right? Is so many organizations believe that there's some level of breach that's already occurred. They believe they're already vulnerable to something that's happening right under their noses. They're just not aware of it. A lot of security technologies today depend on things like normalized baselines and those types of things. And smart attackers are gonna make sure that they slide under the radar. They don't set off the alarms. They don't deviate baselines that create triggers and create investigations. And so it's very hard to find the more sophisticated attackers, the ones that we're really, really concerned about. And active threat hunting allows you to be able to dig in and look for anomalies that might not be discovered by analytics in some of the systems that we have today. Not to say that those aren't getting better and better and better, but so many of the security technologies that are in place today are highly, highly dependent on baseline deviation as their sole means of understanding what's happening within the environment. And you can trickle traffic and slowly over time deviate those baselines, or run so far under the radar that you don't even show up with any baseline deviation whatsoever. And a couple hundred bytes here and there can wreak havoc on a network if it's done correctly. But most systems aren't going to alert you to those types of things.
It's been a great evolution of tools that have allowed us to do this kind of thing. Because when I think back to when I was doing it in early 2000s, I could find the automated stuff, right? I mean, back then we used to use the term script kiddie, right? We could find largely that stuff that was automated, and that was really the essence of our threat hunting. If an attacker did something more sophisticated, it took us much longer, if ever, to catch that particular attacker. Now with the analytics tools that we have, I think we're so much better poised. When I interview folks like you, Charles, and others that have solutions, I'm like, I really wish I had that stuff when I was, in the 20 years ago. And so I think it's very encouraging that we've progressed to this point.
Yeah, there is a lot of great tech out there, and it's just a matter of taking advantage of it and being more, active in the process. Again, of looking for anomalous behavior within the environment, or looking for those things that stand out that could be early indicators of something more widespread or broader within the environment. And at some point, here I'll actually turn on my screen share and show you a couple different views. But one of the interesting things is if you do have, let's just say some level of malware within the environment that's not getting picked up because you're very early in the process. It's not being flagged by the common signatures and those types of things. Being able to understand who's talking to whom and how much data is being transferred, but even in some of the views, being able to understand who's being actively queried, but who's actually responding back. So I'll pull that up here in just a second as we talk through this.
Matt, did you have comments?
Yeah. I had I think part of this is we've had our tools were kind of point in time tools. They were point solution tools. And one of the challenges I think we've had, which I think technology has helped us address, right, is the ability to correlate across multiple data sources, to bring bigger data analytics into the equation. And now we can start to look for some of these anomalies through some automation that we didn't have before. But you still see vendors that are kind of point in time solutions, right? And I kind of go back to a term, Paul, you and I know pretty well, is this concept of continuous monitoring. To Charles's point, right? I have a configuration baseline. That's what I expect the environment to be running as, but it drifts over time. How do I identify that configuration drift? If I'm not doing something on a more regular basis, I'm not going to catch that configuration drift, which now opens up a hole into my network to allow data to come out, right? And so the concept of continuous monitoring has always been intriguing. The question is to Charles, that I want to get some comments from Charles and maybe some vision on this, is how do you actively do that though? How do you effectively do monitoring on a more continuous basis instead of a point in time scan or validation of your baselines? Because I think that's where we fall down in between those windows.
Yeah, so what I see a lot of organizations starting to adopt is the concept of profiling within their own environment, right? Being able to lock a known good configuration of a device type. Say, for example, set a signature that says this is a printer. This is how a printer should behave within the environment. Lock that configuration. It's not a baseline. It's actually a static definition, and then be able to say, alert me when there's any deviations to that, right? When a printer stops acting like a printer, suddenly a device that is a printer, has been identified as a printer, is in the category of a printer, suddenly is hosting, a web server, or suddenly is hosting FTP, or is suddenly, spewing out large volumes of data that it doesn't need to be or shouldn't be. Those are great indications, right? Because as an intelligent attacker, I'm going to leverage the resources that exist within your infrastructure to be able to carry out my attack and probe from within and so on. So active profiling and setting signatures for known good environmental elements, and then saying, watch for deviation on these elements. It's not just a baseline that can be easily deviated over time, and it's not volumetric information. It's actually saying, this is a device type of type and kind. It should be having these conversations to these subnets, so on and so forth. And then when that changes, let me know about it. Now, it's always a delicate balance, right? You can't spend all your time over configuring and run into a situation where every alarm that trips off, you just go, yeah, that's because nobody's updated the profile. Just ignore it. We ignore all the red on the screen all the time. At the same time, if you're not doing that, then you're completely reliant on, deviation-based analysis or blacklists, that are all based on either known normal patterns and volumetric information, which can be deviated over time, or blacklist information and signature-based analysis, which, if I'm a savvy attacker, right, I'm kind of ahead of the pack on that stuff, and I'm not necessarily using the known stuff that's going to get caught by the blacklists and the malware signatures and those types of things.
So, Charles, you've done some of these exercises for customers, some threat hunts.
Yeah. We've engaged with customers and done some threat hunting with them. And a lot of times it comes down to going into their environment and saying, okay, what do you know about your environment? Well, we did a scan of our environment. We've got 51 devices. All right. Well, leveraging passive network-based observations, I can tell you've actually got 55 devices on your network. No, we've got 51. No, you've got 55. These other 4 devices, they just didn't reply to your active, sweeping technologies, because they're, let's just say, ATMs. ATMs are designed, by default to not respond back to inbound requests. So using passive observation technologies, I can tell you how many devices you've got. Then who are they communicating with? Well, they're communicating with 3 different applications. No, it's only 2. I'm telling you, from the network perspective, it's actually 3, right? So when you start to get into those kind of conversations, it's amazing how much deviation from expectation actually exists within the environment.
And it's so that Discovery 101 challenge that everybody has, right?
Know what you have.
Everybody know what you have, and everybody, if they think they have 51, you really have 55, and it's 2 apps versus 3 apps or whatever. Right there's a gap in your visibility to even put the right protections in place.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a blueprint of what the expectation is, then how in the world can you say, well, I've got my firewalls configured appropriately and I've got my ACLs set up that things aren't crossing boundaries that they shouldn't? You run into it all the time where customers say, this can't talk to that. Well, there's an average of 5 conversations a day representing, a couple hundred gig worth of traffic of this talking to that. I swear it's happening, right? It's actually network-based communication, so we can observe it from that perspective. But it turns out that somebody changed something once, opened something up, and then forgot to close it or whatever. But if you're not actively looking at the environment, and you're not doing threat hunting, you're not doing just active profiling of the environment, you're oblivious to all those things.
And so, Charles, this is what your solution does, right? So you take a network tap and you do some passive analysis of the traffic to get a blueprint, essentially.
Yeah, we use both packet-based information and flow-based information. So it's all wired data, right? It's all being sourced and being brought into the portfolio, and then identifying, what's talking to what's connected, where it's connected, as a way of kind of like setting a baseline, right? Setting an expectation standard, and then those can be locked as this is known good. Watch for deviations from known good. They can be dynamic, so they can drift over time. But we've kind of talked about what some of the challenges are when it comes to that. And then you can actually go in and set up complex whitelists and profiles and so forth. So yeah, leveraging information that comes from the infrastructure itself, and then obviously the wire data, the packets that are traversing the infrastructure. That's exactly what our tool is designed to do.
And I like that because it's a really abstract layer. I find so many solutions get too granular about like that's bad behavior and it's very, very specific technique on Windows or whatever, right? But the result of some of those attacks is behavior, right? That I'm impersonating a user, or I've compromised some device and I'm doing something different with it than it normally does. With this solution, you can detect attacks in a more generalized sense rather than being very specific on, they're executing PowerShell on Windows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very, very broad or very, very targeted. If you've got a host of interest that you want to be able to drill in on, it's very easy to do that. I'll just crank up my share here for those that are going to be seeing this on the webcast.
Yes, and if you go to securityweekly.com/VIAVI, we're going to post the video of this segment here. So if you're listening, you can check in and see it. And then, Charles, I know you and your team are working on some cheat sheets or something with threat hunting. So those resources will become available.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about that. So we're working with some industry folks that are pretty active and doing some pretty interesting and I would say innovative things in terms of threat hunting and how they're leveraging these types of technologies. So we're pretty excited about making some of that content available.
Awesome.
But what we're looking at on the screen here is kind of, your traditional war game scenario, right? Which is we're watching for anomalous behavior, and that is blacklist activity, but it's also, your SynFin activity, and it's any deviations from our locked profiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can come in here and I can easily say, do I have anything behaving abnormally from any perspective, whether it's, known blacklist, malware, signature-based detection, whatever it might be. If I come into an event category here, I'll just grab one that's pretty easy here, SYN port sweeping. Let me clear out of that. In just a second, I think it refreshed on me just as I was clicking on it. Yeah, there we go, perfect. So I can come in here and I can see, exactly who's talking to whom. And when I drill in on this and do a search against the known bad actor, right, the IP address, what this actually builds out for me is a conversation tree, right, which is a great way to be able to easily visualize who's talking to whom. Now, a key element of this is where are we observing that communication from? This list along the left-hand side here is actually the flow sources. So it could be the router, it could be the firewall, it could be, various different pieces of infrastructure that are reporting out what they're witnessing. And then being able to build out the conversation tree to be able to say the host of interest, the target known bad actor, what applications they're trying to communicate across, who they're communicating out with, and who's responding back to them. So this is really the key bit here, right? Is this known bad actor had one target in mind, right? That's the blue line across the top where the unidirectional flow is being seen from the known bad actor out to, in this case, it's this IP address 242 within our environment. And I can see here on the green, 242 actually responding back. So that's concerning, right? That's an indication that host, we know it shouldn't be responding back to a known bad actor using a known malware signature or known blacklist activity, or we just know that the profile that we've defined for that subnet or that device type shouldn't be responding back to this type of request, but it is.
Yeah.
And when I hover on it here, you can see it's 3 kilobytes worth of data, right? That says click for forensics of 3 KB. I mean, that's not going to deviate a baseline. That's not going to show up. A smart attacker can do a lot with 3 KB worth of activity back from a host.
Yeah, and what I like too is I think all of us that have defended networks before have that list in our heads or programmatically throughout the environment that are like, these things should never be exposed to the internet, right? I mean, that's the big one, is if it's exposed to the internet or not. This seems like a great solution to tell me those things we might have missed, those configurations that someone may have changed to say, by the way, now this app is exposed to the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I would expect that a known bad actor is going to be trying to reach into our environment or some location within our environment and make some activities. But what I would expect is that my hosts are not able to respond back out. So, if we look at another one here, this port sweep, and we search against that known bad actor, here I've got, the known bad actor here talking to 107 IP addresses, right? So ingress of 107, egress of 8, which effectively means that I've got 8 hosts that are not doing what they should be doing, which is not responding to this. Now that could be a misconfigured firewall, as is, what's being reported in the Capital One case, or it could be that those 8 hosts are already infected with the malware. And so I can literally track that down and over time do a time-based analysis to get all the way back to patient 0 and understand the spread of this within our environment. And that's when we get into that remediation phase of being able to understand how widespread the attack was, what was compromised, what was exfiltrated, and so on. But it all starts with actively participating in threat hunting activities to figure out that an issue exists.
Well, yeah, and we just talked about phoning home in one of the previous segments, and
Right.
this solution absolutely addresses that issue. It's how do you know what's phoning home? And this isn't necessarily an attacker all the time. Maybe this is some software you've put on your domain controller or whatever that's phoning home to China. There was an example of like a webcam, and they discovered it was phoning home to China. Charles, it sounds like your solution is perfectly poised to be able to tell you what's phoning home and if it was successful. Yeah.
What applications are phoning home, how they're phoning home, the path that's being taken, what you can even drill in and be able to get, flow codes out of the firewalls to see which ACL is allowing that communication to occur when in theory it should be blocked and it's not.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. So tell us about like a use case where you've gone in and put this solution in a customer environment.
Yeah, so there was a financial organization that we were working with over in the UK, and in their environment, what we talked about a little bit earlier, it was basically they knew they had penetration testing that needed to happen within their environment. They were bringing in a third party, but before that happened, they wanted to kind of understand what their environment looked like. They wanted to be poised and ready to answer the questions from the auditors when they came in. So exactly as described earlier, right? We went into a subnet. We were told, don't worry, we've already done all of our active scanning. There's 51 devices. Well, actually, there was 55, right? Well, that can't be. There's 51. Right? Here's the results from my active scan tests. Well, these 4 devices, which turned out to be ATMs, didn't respond back to your active scan tests, right? So being able to understand what was connected, then being able to understand where those devices were connected and be able to say, okay, so you've only got, one VLAN. No. The ATMs are segmented. They're on a separate VLAN. But they're not, right? So being able to see a conversation map, a connection map is showing us that these ATMs are in fact not segmented the way you believe they are. So, being able to go in and just say, wow, there are a lot of risks here within this environment is so telling, right? And then what we were able to do with that account was actually build out these conversation trees that you see here, as well as connection trees to be able to say, here's how these devices communicate. Here's what is dependent upon one another. And that was useful for 2 reasons. One, it allowed them to understand what was potentially misconfigured or needed to be reconfigured in their environment to be able to put up the appropriate firewalls and set up the appropriate rules and put the appropriate prevention in place. But secondarily, as they were in the process of migrating some of their core technology out to a cloud-based environment, they now understood what needed to move in tandem and how it needed to move and what needed to be enabled so that security didn't get a black eye when things moved and either they opened it up too much, which would have allowed potential risks to occur, or locked it down too tightly such that the application stopped working. So it was kind of like a twofold event where you were doing some active threat hunting and understanding where your vulnerabilities existed, but then you were leveraging that same information for your cloud migration strategy to ensure that security was well informed and that the plan was well structured, which unfortunately is a lot of times an afterthought when you're doing some of these migrations.
And doing this without such a tool or solution takes a really long time. Like I've been there, right? If you're trying to figure out what's talking to what, it's pretty time consuming. You find your customers save a lot of time.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, even some of the visualization technologies, like, what you're seeing here on the right-hand side of the screen, right? Being able to just click on a conversation and say, here's the destination IP that was, talking back to the host. Just being able to visualize it like that versus having to go through PCAPs and 3-pane decodes and try and create conversation trees out of that and rows of data. I mean, even just a good visualization of this information can substantively reduce the time that it takes to understand what's happening within the environment. So yeah, it's a huge time saver in being able to know what's happening. And, with some of these visualizations, it's very easy to see X is talking to Y. A lot of times that gets lost in the clutter of a 28,000 row spreadsheet of information, but being able to visualize it and see it very quickly, it's not uncommon for us to be firing this up after, being running in a customer's environment for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You show them information on the screen and suddenly 3 of the engineers kind of look at each other and suddenly walk out of the room because they've seen something on the screen. They understand exactly what's happening and they're going to go resolve problems in real time. I mean, that's not an uncommon occurrence.
It's a great use case for time to value For sure. We were just talking about that on the previous segment. Querying the vendors for what's my time to value. And I love the solutions that you get it in 15 minutes later, engineers are running out of the room to go fix things. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great to see.
In a highly diverse environment, in the complexity that's getting introduced constantly with these new technologies, this is a big challenge. Just this level of visibility is hard to get and understand because nobody knows where half of their stuff is sometimes.
Yeah.
And this really helps.
Well, especially in your ATM example, a retail chain, right, where you've got 30, 40, 50, 100 different, branch offices or stores or whatever, or, banks, branch offices. This is extremely
and legacy applications, right, that are still running in largely mainframe environments, and people are going, I don't know, the folks that built this stuff haven't been here for the last 10 or 12 years. It runs, it works. We're scared to move it. We're scared to mess with it too much. But at the same time, we need to apply data center security to this infrastructure. So we got to know how this stuff is actually functioning, how it's actually working before we can really start to lock it down. PCI DSS compliance or HIPAA compliance or whatever it is saying we need to tighten our security. But we don't understand how this stuff works. So how are we supposed to do that? Right? This kind of technology can really inform an organization and allow them to begin on those initiatives, whether it's a cloud migration or a more secure data center or infrastructure initiative. Having visibility and having these types of insights are what enables those business objectives.
And I think something I want to point out here a little bit, I know we're talking about threat hunting, but there's a lot of other value that these solutions bring to the table. And we just talked about it, visibility, right? Understanding scope, understanding communications. Now, granted, you can use it for a lot of additional things, but you're solving some of the basic fundamentals that I think a lot of people struggle with still today, Charles, is I don't know what's there. I don't know what's communicating. Now that I have that, now I can continue to mature what I do and actively looking for threats in my environment because now I have a really good solid picture of what's in my environment.
It's a great point. I mean, our roots are kind of in the remediation phase, right? After the event has occurred. What we've seen are more and more and more use cases where threat hunting and active participation in understanding what's occurring is a common use case for our technology. So you're absolutely right. We're talking kind of on the active threat hunting piece, but there's so many other use cases when it comes to remediation. And we all know it's not an if, it's a when, that an organization will suffer a breach or be subject to some type of an attack. And so what do you do once that occurs? How do you understand how widespread it was? How do you understand what was exfiltrated? How do you understand what your requirements are at this point now that something has taken place? And so, there's so many different applications of this type of technology, and visibility enables so much. And the cool thing is that because this is all coming from an infrastructure or network perspective, it's very, very difficult for even a savvy attacker to cover their tracks and hide from some of this stuff, right? A savvy attacker is going to clear syslogs and do a lot of things to try and cover their tracks, but it's very hard when you've got 24/7 capture device recording information or live flows that are happening every 15 seconds and being recorded to go back and kind of cover those tracks and really scrub out that infrastructure information. So point being, these records and this insight is here and available either to the organization who could leverage it directly, or when it comes time to bring in a third party organization and say, we need some help, we need to bring in some real hardcore experts because we have suffered a breach. And here's all the gold that we have for you in terms of what's connected, what's communicating, what's been happening ever since this event occurred.
Charles,
as they say, the network never lies.
That's it. So a couple of points. Is VIAVI? Are you exhibiting at Black Hat? Will you be at Black Hat?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know that we've got a presence at Black Hat. I don't know that we're actually actively exhibiting, but I know that we'll have a presence at Black Hat.
Okay, so if you're interested, reach out, set up a meeting as we talked about in our previous segment. And also the interface you showed us, you've got a new release coming up around Black Hat time.
Yeah, so actually the interface that I just showed, that release dropped last week, and we've got another pretty sizable release that ties in more threat hunting capability, advances our profiling functions, and allows more direct correlation between our flow content and our packet content, and that's going to be happening in the early September timeframe. So pretty exciting. A lot of forward momentum on this, all coming directly from customer feedback as they're finding more and more interesting use cases for this technology.
That's fantastic. So make sure you check out. Charles, anything else you want to share with our audience?
No, I think this was great. I appreciate the time and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about, actively participating in a security posture. I think it's one of the most interesting topics. It's obviously something that I've got some passion around, and I've seen so many people make such great strides in the past just couple of years with really actively working within their environment that appreciate the opportunity to get the word out and would welcome any future conversations or questions from the audience.
That's awesome. I encourage our audience to visit securityweekly.com/VIAVI. We'll post a video here, any additional materials, and if you're interested, you can sign up a form and get a demo and meet with them at Black Hat. So, Charles, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you having me.
And that will conclude this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching.